Have you ever confided in someone about a past hurt? You know, something that really left a lasting mark on you, only to be met with that heavy sigh.
Oh, and then they drop the line.
Right. The classic, aren't you over that by now?
Or, that was so long ago, why are you still stuck on it?
Exactly. It's this very specific kind of dismissal that basically treats your pain like an expired carton of milk. Like, oh, the date on this passed, throw it out.
Right, we have this intense societal obsession with emotional efficiency. We treat healing like it's some sort of corporate project with a firm, non-negotiable deadline.
And if you miss that deadline, well, you must be doing something fundamentally wrong. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are tearing down the myth of the emotional expiration date.
It's such a crucial topic.
It really is, and we're using a brilliant piece from Psychology Today to do it. It was written by Katie Gillis, who is a licensed clinical social worker and a trauma therapist.
And she specializes in something the clinical world calls family of origin trauma.
Right, which is essentially the wounds given to you by the very people who are biologically and, socially supposed to keep you safe. The piece is titled, quite fittingly, When Should We Be Over Our Trauma?
It's a question that just permeates our entire culture.
Mm.
And Gillis brings this incredibly clinical but also profoundly personal perspective to why that whole deadline framework is not just flawed, but actively harmful to the human nervous system.
So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack that intense societal pressure to just get over it. We're going to explore realistic timelines of healing and really understand the mechanics of why past experiences stick around in the body for as long as they do.
And we've got some fascinating longitudinal research to look at later on, too.
Yes, we do. Ultimately, this is all about validating your own experiences, as the listener, and giving you a new lens for understanding human resilience.
I love how Gink starts her article, too. It's incredibly relatable.
So relatable. She grounds this massive psychological concept in a very modern, very everyday experience, which is the social media comments section.
Ah, yes. The quintessential modern battleground for emotional validation.
Honestly. So she's a trauma therapist, right? She writes entire books about parental abandonment, and she posted a short social media reel to support survivors of rejection.
Right, just a quick video offering solidarity.
Yeah, and she used her own personal experience with family rejection as the core example. And of course, as clockwork dictates on the internet, she gets a comment from a classic keyboard warrior.
Naturally.
Someone she affectionately dubs Bob from Ohio. So Bob writes, "Why are you not over this yet? This happened, 20 years ago?"
It's the ultimate dismissal. Just a complete invalidation of a human experience based entirely on a calendar.
And Bob didn't even stop there. He followed up with another comment claiming that, well, people overuse the word trauma lately and that family rejection isn't even real trauma.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he asserts that people get over that type of thing in way less time. And if she's still harping on it, she's just choosing to stay stuck.
That's so heavy to receive from a stranger.
It is, but I actually love how honestly Gillis reacts to this in the piece. Her first instinct is this incredibly human, witty internal monologue. She thinks to herself like, yikes, I guess my anti-aging cream isn't working as well as I thought if this stranger knows my trauma happened 20 years ago.
That is such a great reaction. That use of humor as a rapid-fire defense mechanism is something so many people will recognize.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just a brilliant way to deflect the sudden, sharp impact of being publicly judged like that.
The humor fades pretty quickly, though, and then we hit this fascinating contradiction in human empathy. Like if someone broke their leg 20 years ago and it wasn't set properly and it healed a bit twisted or jagged.
No one would ever stop them on the street and ask why they're limping.
Exactly. Or ask why it still aches when it rains. We understand physical mechanics implicitly. We know a bone is a bone. But why do we treat invisible emotional wounds like they magically evaporate just because the Earth completed 20 trips around the sun?
What's fascinating here is the immediate visceral effect that comment had on her, despite her immense professional expertise.
Right, because she's an expert.
Exactly. Gillis spends her days providing validation to abuse survivors. She literally trains other clinicians and healthcare workers on the profound, long-lasting impacts of family trauma.
She wrote the book on it.
She did. She knows, intellectually and scientifically, that Bob from Ohio is objectively wrong. And yet, she admits that she completely spiraled.
She didn't just brush it off.
Not at all. She went down a massive internet rabbit hole, scrolling through the accounts of other trauma therapists, combing through hashtags, just desperately seeking external validation that her pain was real.
Wow, so she actually started questioning her own reality over one comment.
She did. She started asking herself, are they right? Am I really stuck? Was it even real trauma in the first place?
That is wild.
It is. And she recognizes she was doing exactly what she sees her clients do in her private practice. Just intellectualizing, explaining, excusing, and slipping right back into a familiar anxious pattern.
It just perfectly highlights the anatomy of gaslighting, doesn't it? Her rational brain knows Bob is wrong, but that comment bypasses logic entirely.
Right. It sounds exactly like the toxic voices from her past.
Okay, let's unpack this, though, because I want to play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure. Go for it.
Because while Bob is obviously being cruel, isn't the internet actually full of people calling, like, a bad date or a tough meeting at work dramatic? Doesn't he have a tiny bit of a point about the word losing its meaning?
It's a valid question.
I just want to make sure we look at this from all sides, and the author herself acknowledges this tension in the source text. So if the word is genuinely being diluted in pop culture, how do we differentiate between Bob making a fair observation about language and Bob horribly invalidating a very real, deep experience?
It's a very fair distinction to make, and honestly, it's one the clinical world is currently grappling with.
I bet.
The dilution of clinical terminology is a documented phenomenon right now. Everyone has an armchair psychology degree from social media.
Right, exactly.
However, Gillis firmly asserts that while the word might be overused to describe everyday discomforts, being rejected and abandoned by one's own family is undeniably profoundly traumatic.
Because it's your family.
Yes, these are the very people biologically and socially mandated to protect you. When that bond is severed, it isn't just a sad event. It breaks your basic template for human trust and safety.
That makes so much sense.
In fact, she mentions that sometimes even the word trauma feels too small for that specific kind of foundational betrayal.
It alters your entire operating system for how you navigate the world.
It really does. And she provides a brilliant comparison to highlight the sheer hypocrisy of Bob's comment.
Oh, what was the comparison?
She asked, would this keyboard warrior tell a veteran who is decades removed from combat to just get over it?
Oh, wow. No, never.
Right. Or would they walk up to an adult who, as a child had to flee a war-torn country and say, that was 20 years ago, why are you still harping on it?
Nobody would ever do that, or at least society would widely condemn them if they did.
Exactly. This exposes a highly arbitrary, socially constructed standard of which traumas are considered legitimate enough to deserve our ongoing compassion.
I see. So we have a hierarchy of suffering.
We do. We tend to validate trauma that is loud, highly visible, and clearly inflicted by an external, recognizable enemy like a war or a natural disaster.
Right, the things that make the evening news.
Exactly. But chronic, quiet trauma like neglect, family rejection, or systemic emotional abuse that happens behind closed doors.
And society doesn't want to look at that.
No, because society is deeply invested in the myth of the safe, loving family unit. We rely on that myth. We are highly uncomfortable when someone challenges it.
So society blames the survivor for not moving on, rather than facing the uncomfortable reality of what families are actually capable of doing to their own members?
Precisely. It's much easier to blame the victim for being stuck than to admit the system is broken.
Okay, so if we establish that these experiences, like severe family rejection, are undeniably traumatic, regardless of what Bob from Ohio thinks, we have to look at the mechanics of it. Like, why don't they just fade away?
This is where the science gets really interesting.
This gets to the core thesis of the article, which completely blew my mind. She writes, "Time alone does not heal what we have not yet processed."
That sentence is the absolute anchor of this entire discussion.
It's so powerful.
It is. We have this old, culturally ingrained adage, time heals all wounds.
Right, you hear it everywhere.
But it is, frankly, a myth when it comes to psychological injury. Time passing is merely a measurement of days. It is not an active intervention.
To really wrap my head around this, I started thinking about it like food storage.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Imagine coping mechanisms are like putting a raw piece of meat representing an emotional wound into a deep freezer. When you go through something terrible, especially as a child or a vulnerable adult, you can't process it then and there.
You're just trying to survive.
Exactly. You don't have the emotional tools, the language, or the safety. So you freeze it. You use coping mechanisms to survive your daily life. Maybe you overwork, maybe you use substances, maybe you turn to food, or maybe you just emotionally numb out completely and dissociate.
It's a highly effective survival strategy in the short term.
But it comes at a cost, right? The freezing preserves you in that moment. It stops you from bleeding out emotionally so you can get through high school or get through your workday. But the freezer doesn't cook the meat.
Right.
It doesn't process the trauma. It just suspends it in a block of ice. So when you finally thaw it out, maybe 20 years later, when you finally achieve sobriety or you finally get away from the abusers or you just finally feel safe enough in a healthy relationship to look at it, it is just as raw as the exact day it went into the ice.
That is such a vivid way to picture it.
20 years passed on the calendar, but the wound didn't age a single day.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, especially psychotraumatology, which is the actual biological science of how a terrified brain alters its own physical structure, your freezer analogy aligns perfectly.
Really? How so?
Healing isn't dictated by the ticking of a clock. It is heavily shaped by external factors and resources. Processing that thawed trauma requires a state of physical and psychological safety that many survivors simply do not have access to for years or even decades after the event.
Because they're too busy just trying to pay rent, keep a job, and survive the aftermath. They don't have the luxury of unpacking it.
Exactly. Gillis points out that people who seem to get over it sooner often had strong external supports immediately available to them.
Like what kind of support?
Things like a safe family environment to retreat to, access to quality therapy, faith communities, support groups, or a really strong, chosen family. These resources help people mentally digest what happened.
But without them, the trauma stays frozen.
Yes. And the source material references some very compelling research to back this up. For instance, there's a 2025 longitudinal study by Mann and colleagues that looked at post-traumatic stress in World Trade Center responders over a 20-year period.
Wow. A full 2 decades of data tracking the exact same individuals. What did they actually find?
The Mann study didn't just look at whether people were feeling sad. They tracked how the nervous system actually remained stuck in a biological fight-or-flight state for 2 decades, specifically because those responders lacked immediate psychological debriefing and ongoing support.
20 years in fight or flight.
Yes. The lack of support physically altered their stress response. Their brains were essentially still sounding the alarm bells years after the towers fell.
Because their bodies never got the signal that the danger had completely passed and they were allowed to stand down?
Exactly. Alongside that, Gillis cites a comprehensive 15-year narrative review by Alf and colleagues, which is published in the European Journal of Psychotraumatology.
Okay, and what did that one show?
Both of these pieces of research highlight a really sobering reality. Severe trauma symptoms can and do stay with survivors for decades. This is especially true after catastrophic events if the survivors were not given adequate support and resources to process what happened.
It always comes back to the resources.
It does. The passage of 20 years didn't magically erase the symptoms for those responders. The presence or absence of ongoing support systems dictated their long-term well-being. People who had to jump right back into the grind without specialized care retained the biological markers of trauma far longer.
We have to completely decouple the idea of healing from the idea of time passing.
Yes, that's
They're two totally different variables. And if time doesn't naturally cure it, and we can only really process it when we finally have the right safety and resources, what does getting over it even mean?
That is the ultimate question Gillis wrestles with in the final sections of her piece. The phrase, getting over it, implies a finish line.
Like crossing a ribbon at the end of a marathon.
Right? A state of pure, unblemished restoration, as if the event never occurred at all.
Which is just impossible.
Yeah.
She challenges these unspoken, unrealistic standards we've all kind of implicitly agreed upon. Like, does getting over it mean you never ever think about it again? That's amnesia, not healing.
Exactly.
Does it mean you are never triggered by it? Because anyone who understands human biology knows that sensory triggers can happen entirely involuntarily.
The body keeps the score. A trigger isn't a sign of emotional weakness. It's a biological alarm system.
Right.
A certain smell, a specific tone of voice, the angle of the light of a certain time of year. These sensory inputs can trigger the amygdala to initiate a physiological panic response before your conscious, logical prefrontal cortex even registers what's happening.
So you're reacting before you even know why you're reacting?
Yes.
Huh?
Expecting a survivor to never be triggered is demanding that their biology stop functioning to protect them. It's an impossible standard.
And here's where it gets really interesting, or maybe just really frustrating. The most insidious standard she brings up Does getting over it just mean we stop calling it trauma and we stop talking about it simply so we don't make other people uncomfortable?
Ah, yes, the comfort of the masses.
I find it so twisted that the burden of making the rest of the world feel comfortable is almost always placed squarely on the shoulders of the person who was harmed in the first place.
It's backwards.
Completely backwards. You suffered the abuse, but now it's your job to be quiet and presentable about it, so Bob from Ohio doesn't feel weirded out while scrolling his feed.
It is a profound injustice, but it's a very common societal mechanism. We demand that survivors sanitize their pain so the rest of us don't have to confront the darker realities of human behavior.
Right.
Gillis is making a radical assertion here. None of these standards, amnesia, biological suppression, or forced silence, are realistic metrics for recovery.
So, how should you, the person listening to this right now, reframe your own expectations of healing based on this science? If the finish line is a mirage, what are we actually walking toward?
We have to accept that there is absolutely no universal deadline for healing. It is not a standardized test you can study for and pass.
Thank goodness for that.
The trajectory depends entirely on the unique individual, the specific nature of the trauma, the duration of the trauma, and the incredibly complex journey of safety and support they've had to navigate since the event.
It's so individualized.
Extremely. Which raises an important question. Why are we, as a society, so obsessed with deadlines for emotional recovery in the first place?
We just love a neat bow on things.
We demand a neat, linear narrative with a happy ending. But human psychology is cyclical, it's layered, and it's deeply dependent on context. Healing is not about the absence of the memory or the complete eradication of pain. It is often simply about integration.
What does that integration actually look like in a person's day-to-day life, like practically speaking?
It looks like taking that frozen, jagged experience, thawing it in a safe space, and slowly weaving it into the larger story of your life so that it no longer dictates your daily choices.
Oh, I love that.
The memory still exists. It might even still hurt, but it no longer runs the show. It becomes a chapter in your book rather than the only lens through which you view the world.
So what does this all mean for you, listening right now? Whether you are actively unpacking your own history, thawing out your own past, or whether you are trying to be a better friend, a better partner, or part of a chosen family to someone else who is struggling, the absolute key takeaway here is patience.
Patience is everything.
It is recognizing that healing is dictated by safety and support, not by a calendar. If you still hurt from something that happened 20 years ago, it doesn't mean you're weak, and it doesn't mean you're failing at therapy.
Not at all.
It means you survived, and your body remembers what that survival cost you.
I think that leads to a necessary shift in how we approach this as a culture, too. Since all the clinical experience and the long-term research shows that processing trauma depends so heavily on external support, safety, and available resources, perhaps we need to fundamentally change the question we ask.
What should we be asking instead?
Well, instead of asking individuals why they aren't over it yet, we should be asking ourselves a much harder question.
Which is,
Are we creating a community and an environment where they actually feel safe enough to heal?